You're in a meeting, and someone leans back in their chair, smiles slightly, and says, "Let me explain this in a simpler way." The room goes quiet. You feel the heat rise in your face, your shoulders tighten, and your mind starts racing for the right response, fast. You don't like admitting how often this moment controls you. Either you say nothing and feel diminished for the rest of the day, or you push back too hard and regret the tone immediately after. Here's the interruption you can use today, word for word. "I understand the point. You don't need to speak to me that way." Say it once, evenly, without apology, and then stop talking. In the next 10 minutes, the emotional pressure drops. The other person either adjusts or goes quiet. Your body settles because you didn't attack, and you didn't surrender. The moment passes without sticking to you. Educational content inspired by classical Stoic texts. Not medical, psychological, financial, or legal advice. This won't rush you, but it will keep you from spiraling. The pain here isn't generic disrespect. It's that specific, belittling tone that sneaks into professional conversations, family discussions, and even casual exchanges. It lands right between insult and deniability. If you react emotionally, you look sensitive. If you stay silent, you feel smaller afterward. Over time, this trains people to talk down to you again. This is costing you authority, focus, and a quiet sense of self-trust that should be available to you by default. What you're really dealing with is not anger, it's loss of position. The moment someone talks down to you, your nervous system reads it as a threat to status, and your body wants to either fight or disappear. Neither response serves you. The Stoic move isn't suppression or dominance, it's composure with boundaries. By the end of this lesson, you won't be unbotherable, and that's not the goal. Instead, you'll recognize the moment sooner, respond earlier with neutral firmness, and leave conversations feeling intact instead of replaying them for hours. You'll stay calm without giving up ground, and respected without raising your voice. If this kind of practical control matters to you, especially in moments that feel socially risky, these lessons are built to keep earning your time. Subscribe for more lessons like this. First, you'll learn how to interrupt the emotional surge before it hijacks your voice. Next, you'll see how to correct a condescending dynamic without triggering defensiveness or escalation. Then, you'll practice holding steady when the pressure increases and the other person doesn't immediately back down. Finally, you'll watch how these tools play out inside a real situation that doesn't magically resolve, but does shift. There's a moment later in this lesson where the other person doubles down, where most people either snap or shut down completely. When you reach that point, you'll know exactly what to do instead of freezing or overcorrecting. You're sitting across from someone at work, maybe on a video call, maybe at a conference table. They tilt their head slightly and say, "I think what you're trying to say is," before restating your point in a slower, simpler way. It's subtle. No one else reacts. But inside, you feel that familiar jolt, your chest tightens, your thoughts speed up, and you feel the pull to either interrupt or go quiet. Here's the microscript to use in that exact moment. "That's actually not what I'm saying. Let me restate it." Then you restate your point in one sentence and stop. No explanation. No apology. No extra warmth added to soften it. This works because it corrects the frame without attacking the person. You're not accusing them of being rude. You're not defending yourself emotionally. You're simply reclaiming authorship of your own words. When someone talks down to you, the real move they're making is taking control of the narrative, positioning themselves as the translator and you as the unclear one. This line quietly takes that role back. Picture this in a North American office setting. A senior colleague interrupts you during a planning meeting and reframes your idea as if it needed fixing. You might have jumped in too fast, over-explained, or gone silent and felt dismissed. With this response, you correct the record once and move on. Even if they don't apologize, the room registers that you're not passive and not reactive. You didn't escalate, but you didn't yield. Here's the tiny action you can take today. Write this line down somewhere you'll see it, your notes app, a sticky note, the margin of a notebook. Read it once before your next conversation where hierarchy or tension exists. That's it. No rehearsal speeches. Just familiarity. Now slow this down for a moment. Take a breath through your nose, count to 3, and imagine yourself saying the line at half your normal speaking speed. Calm isn't about volume, it's about tempo. When you slow your delivery, your nervous system signals safety, and other people unconsciously follow that pace. What often gets in the way here is a mistake you may not notice you're making. You try to prove you weren't confused. Proof invites debate. Debate invites escalation. Correction, delivered cleanly, does not. You're not trying to win approval, you're maintaining clarity. This matters later because not every condescending moment will be obvious or polite. Some will be wrapped in humor or helpfulness. If you can correct early, you prevent the buildup that leads to either resentment or an outburst later on. Another common scenario, a family member explains something about your own life choices as if you're unaware. The tone is light, almost joking, but it lands heavy. The mistake here is letting familiarity pull you into old roles: child, junior, problem to be fixed. The correction sounds like this: I've already considered that. What I'm deciding now is something else. Then you stop. This works because it separates consideration from decision. You're not dismissing them, you're signaling that the discussion has moved past that point. Try this tiny action next time you feel that familiar family tension. Notice the urge to justify. Don't act on it. Let one clean sentence stand on its own. That pause afterward is not awkward, it's authority settling into place. Here's a brief pattern interrupt you can use if you feel yourself speeding up. Press your tongue lightly to the roof of your mouth and exhale once through your nose before you speak. It takes 2 seconds and prevents the rushed tone that often undermines otherwise solid words. This idea matters later because once you can calmly reclaim your words, you are no longer trapped between exploding and freezing. You're building the skill of response, measured, intentional, and repeatable. And when the pressure increases, this becomes the foundation you stand on instead of something you scramble to remember. You're halfway through a conversation when it happens. The person smiles and says, "Relax, I'm just trying to help," right after delivering something that clearly talked down to you. The room laughs lightly. Your body doesn't. You feel that internal snap forming, the sense that if you don't push back now, you've just accepted the frame. The mistake most people make in this moment is responding to the content instead of the position. You explain yourself again. You clarify your intent. You argue your case. But none of that addresses what actually happened. The issue wasn't misunderstanding. It was tone. And by debating content, you let the original dynamic stand. Here's the correction. It's not dramatic. It's not sharp. It's this: I'm calm. I just want us to keep this respectful. Then you pause. That's the whole move. This works because it does something counterintuitive. It refuses the emotional bait without denying your boundary. You're not defending your mood, and you're not accusing them of bad intent. You're stating a condition for continuing the interaction. Respect becomes the baseline, not something you negotiate for. Imagine this in a North American workplace setting. A teammate makes a sarcastic remark, then hides behind humor. Old patterns might push you to either laugh it off and feel irritated later, or challenge them and risk looking tense. With this response, you don't match their sarcasm. You don't explain why it bothered you. You simply reset the standard. Most people adjust immediately, not because they're kind, but because clarity removes their wiggle room. Here's a tiny action you can take today. Practice saying that line once, out loud, when you're alone. Not perfectly. Just once. The goal isn't memorization, it's familiarity. When pressure hits, your body reaches for what it recognizes. Now pause for a slow practice moment. Drop your shoulders. Let your jaw loosen. Take one full breath before you imagine saying the line again. Notice how different it feels to speak from a settled body instead of a braced one. This is not about sounding confident. It's about being steady. Another common version of this moment shows up in family or social settings. Someone says, "Wow, you're sensitive today," after crossing a line. The trap here is self-defense. If you argue that you're not sensitive, you've already accepted their framing. The correction sounds like this: "I'm fine. I just don't want to be spoken to like that." Then silence. Why silence matters here is important. When you keep talking, you turn a boundary into a debate. When you stop, you let the boundary exist on its own. Most people feel the shift immediately, even if they don't acknowledge it out loud. If you feel your heart rate spike before you speak, use this pattern: interrupt, exhale longer than you inhale. Inhale for 3, exhale for 5. One cycle is enough. It tells your nervous system you're not under threat, which keeps your voice even. This idea matters later because not everyone will back off right away. Some people will test whether you mean what you say. If your response depends on them cooperating, you'll wobble. If your response depends only on you staying aligned, you stay grounded regardless of how they react. The deeper Stoic principle underneath this is simple: you don't control how others speak, but you do control the terms under which you continue engaging. Responding instead of reacting is not about being polite, it's about staying sovereign over your attention and your tone. As you move forward, keep this in mind: the goal is not to shut people down. The goal is to stop abandoning yourself in small moments that add up. When you can name respect calmly and let it stand, you create space where escalation doesn't thrive. This becomes especially important when the pressure increases and the other person doesn't immediately correct course. That's where the next layer comes in: how to hold steady when neutrality alone isn't enough, and the conversation keeps pushing. A common belief sneaks into your head in these moments, almost without you noticing it: if I don't soften this, I'll make things worse. You assume that firmness will escalate, that holding your ground will turn the interaction hostile, or that neutrality only works when the other person is reasonable. Under real pressure, that belief quietly takes over. Here's the truth that matters more: what escalates tension isn't firmness, it's emotional leakage. When your voice speeds up, when your words pile on, when your tone carries irritation you haven't named, that's when things spin. Calm boundaries don't inflame situations. Wobbling ones do. So here's the instruction when neutrality hasn't worked and the other person keeps pressing. You don't explain again. You don't sharpen your tone. You narrow the exchange. The line is simple: I'm not going to continue this conversation in that tone. Then you stop engaging. That's it. No threat. No lecture. No visible frustration. The stakes here are real. This is the moment where most people either cave, teaching others that persistence works, or explode, teaching others that they can provoke you. This response teaches neither. It teaches that access to you is conditional on basic respect, and that condition isn't negotiable in real time. Picture this in a high-pressure North American work environment. A supervisor dismisses your input, you correct the tone, and they double down with, "You're being defensive." The room is watching. Old instincts urge you to justify yourself or match the authority in the room. Instead, you say the line once, evenly, and then you disengage, by returning to your notes, by staying silent, by shifting your attention. You haven't stormed out. You haven't argued. But you've drawn a clear edge around what you will and won't participate in. This works because it removes fuel. Condescension thrives on reaction, on visible discomfort, on attempts to regain approval, on emotional back and forth. When you withdraw engagement without drama, the behavior has nothing to push against. Even if the other person doesn't adjust immediately, the dynamic has changed. Now slow this moment down. Before you imagine saying that line, notice your body. Are your shoulders lifted? Is your jaw tight? Let both drop slightly. Take one slow breath and feel your feet against the floor. The goal here isn't to feel relaxed, it's to feel present. Presence keeps your voice level when pressure is high. This same tool applies outside of work. A relative keeps making patronizing comments, even after you've set a softer boundary. You're tempted to snap because history is heavy and patience feels thin. Instead, you say, I'm not continuing this conversation like this, and you physically shift, stand up, change rooms, redirect your attention. You don't announce punishment. You simply remove participation. Here's what makes this hard: there's often no immediate resolution. The other person may scoff. They may act confused. They may push once more. This is where people abandon the boundary to smooth things over. But smoothing things over at this stage teaches that your limits are flexible under pressure. Here's a slow practice moment you can do now. Imagine the scene where someone keeps pressing. Feel the urge to explain. Let it pass. Picture yourself saying the line once, then doing nothing else. Notice the discomfort in the silence, and notice that you survive it. Silence doesn't mean weakness. It means the exchange has stopped being cooperative. This isn't about winning. It's about durability. You're training yourself to stay intact when the social temperature rises. When you don't need the other person to immediately agree, you stop leaking energy trying to manage their reaction. There's a vignette coming where this exact skill gets tested, where the pressure is layered, public, and emotionally charged. The point won't be to shut the situation down completely. It will be to remain steady inside it, even while it's unresolved. That's where this lesson earns its keep. You're standing in your kitchen during a family gathering, plate half full, conversation already tense. Someone makes a comment about your career, light on the surface, loaded underneath. "So, are you still figuring things out?" they say, with that familiar smile that pretends it's curiosity. A few people glance over. Your body reacts before your mind does. Heat in your chest. Jaw tight. Old instincts line up fast. For a split second, the old reaction almost wins. You feel the urge to explain everything: your plans, your progress, your reasons. You imagine talking faster, louder, piling on details until they finally understand. At the same time, another part of you wants to shut down completely, take a sip of your drink, and disappear from the conversation. Instead, you pause. You remember the first tool. You don't rush. You say, evenly, "I've thought a lot about it. What I'm working on now is different." Then you stop. No defense. No edge. They raise an eyebrow. "I'm just saying, from the outside it doesn't really look." This is where things usually spiral. You feel the pressure rise again, stronger now because it's public and familiar. You notice your shoulders creeping up. You let them drop. One slow breathe out through your nose. "I'm calm," you say, steady. "I just want to keep this respectful." There's a beat of silence. It's uncomfortable. Someone shifts their weight. The conversation doesn't magically reset. In fact, the person presses again, softer but still pointed. "Wow, okay. Didn't mean to hit a nerve." This is the exact moment where the old pattern almost takes over. You feel the pull to smooth it over, to laugh, to reassure them that everything's fine so the tension goes away. You recognize it now, not as weakness, but as habit. You narrow the exchange instead. "I'm not going to continue this conversation in that tone," you say. Not louder. Not colder. Just clear. And then you turn slightly, setting your plate down, giving your attention somewhere else. The room doesn't explode. No one storms out. The moment hangs, unresolved, but calmer. Your heart is still beating faster than normal, but it's not racing. You're still present. You didn't abandon yourself to keep the peace, and you didn't attack to reclaim ground. A few minutes later, the conversation drifts. Someone asks about food. Someone else tells a story. The person who made the comment doesn't apologize, but they don't repeat it either. That matters more than it looks like. Inside, something has shifted. Not triumph. Not relief. Just clarity. You notice that you're not replaying the moment on a loop. You're not rehearsing comebacks. You're still aware, still a little keyed up, but intact. Here's the slow practice embedded in this scene. Notice how you didn't need closure. The improvement wasn't that the other person changed. The improvement was that you stayed aligned under pressure. You responded early, you corrected the frame, and when it didn't adjust, you withdrew engagement without drama. That's the integration. These tools aren't meant to fix people. They're meant to keep you from losing position when the social temperature rises. The old reaction almost won because it's familiar and fast. The new response worked because you recognized the moment sooner and trusted fewer words. As the evening continues, there's still tension in the air. Not everything is smooth, but you feel steadier moving through it. You're not scanning for the next jab. You're not bracing. You're just there. That's the real signal of progress. Not that situations resolve cleanly, but that they no longer hijack you. What you've been practicing through this lesson is a shift from reacting to responding. Reacting scatters you. It pulls your attention outward, into tone, status, and approval. Responding brings you back into intention. It doesn't make you passive or dominant. It makes you deliberate. And that difference is what keeps you steady when someone tries to shrink you with a look, a joke, or a condescending phrase. First, we step directly into the moment where your body tightens and your mind rushes, and you learned how to interrupt that surge early with one neutral sentence that stops the slide before it turns into either silence or explosion. Then we moved into reclaiming your words, correcting the frame calmly when someone rewrites what you said, so you don't end up arguing a version of yourself you never offered. Next, you practiced naming respect without accusation, using short lines that reset the dynamic instead of feeding it. Finally, you saw what happens when neutrality alone isn't enough, how to narrow the exchange and remove engagement without drama when pressure stays high. Each step built on the last, not to make conversations perfect, but to keep you intact inside them. Now let's lock this in with 3 things you can do today. Not someday. Today. First, choose one line from this lesson and write it down exactly as it is. Put it somewhere you'll see it, your phone, a notebook, a sticky note on your desk. Read it once before your next meeting or conversation where tension might show up. This isn't rehearsal. It's priming. Familiar words are easier to reach under pressure. Second, practice the tempo shift once. Sometime today, when you're alone, say one of the lines out loud at half your normal speaking speed. Notice how it feels in your body. Calm authority lives in pace, not volume. You're training your nervous system as much as your mouth. Third, notice the urge to explain, and don't act on it once. Just once today. When someone misunderstands you or pushes a little, let one clean sentence stand on its own. Then stop. That pause afterward is not awkwardness. It's you holding ground. As you move forward, the next layer to build is what happens before words, how to catch the internal spike even earlier, before your tone or posture gives anything away. A good follow-up lesson is something like emotional control, staying grounded when you feel provoked, because it works one step upstream, where reactions are born. That's where emotional control stops being situational and starts becoming reliable. You don't need to become unbetterable. You don't need to dominate conversations or correct every slight. What you're building is consistency. When your responses match your values more often than your impulses, respect stops feeling fragile. It becomes something you carry, not something you negotiate for in the moment. If you want continued emotional control that actually works in real conversations, subscribe and keep going.